I know that there have always been outlandish rumors and ideas about what could possibly happen in these situations, but this seems to be potentially different where some of the outlandish could actually take place.
Sure, anything could happen. If a couple months ago, if you would have sat there and said that Texas and OU had been in cahoots with the SEC for all this time and this was going to happen, you know, it wouldn't have totally surprised me, but it certainly was a bit of a. I think I got to sneeze. When we learned about all of this, that it was a bit of a shock. A lot was going on. I mean, we're still in the midst of the NIL jungle of what's going on there and everything else, and lo and behold, this comes out. And now, if you're going to expand, if you're going to have realignment, you have to beat every bush out there, because you have the ACC with its locked-in grant of rights deal. You certainly have a group of teams out of the Big 12 that don't necessarily turn on television sets, don't do a lot in terms of the athletic, reputation of what they could bring to the Big Ten in terms of widespread, from sport to sport to sport. So, I think that it's very easy for us to sit there and say, oh, we're looking at what could happen with the Pac-12, whether it's a scheduling alliance, whether it's a merger, whether it's cannibalization, that the Big Ten acts as the larger fish and tries to swallow part of the smaller fish. I mean, I think anything is potentially there. And then we really haven't even necessarily gotten into the super conference talk, which, the more I think about it, may still be a little premature. But it's, once ESPN and Fox and the television partners start swinging some weight in there and they start saying what it is that they want, nothing really is going to surprise me. I mean, it really is. I mean, if you would have told me before Rutgers and Maryland were going to be in the Big Ten, instead of somebody out of the ACC or Notre Dame or whoever, I would have laughed in your face. And lo and behold, here they are. But I mean, I can go all the way back to when I was an undergrad and Penn State was added to the conference, and that felt like, and the geography was there, and that felt like a weird addition at that point. So I don't think that we ever sit there and, whenever we see something and say, oh, that's a slam dunk, that's going to happen in realignment, generally just cross that one off the list, because the too obvious doesn't ever come to pass.
So while your overall theme here, Kevin, is that, don't be surprised by anything, everything's on the board. You did say that you would be surprised. Not surprised. You think the super conference is most likely premature. Why do you think that?
Just seems like a lot of moving parts at this point, and you're really having to tear up a lot of things at that point. And I think that anybody that wants to kind of put a super conference together may want to sit there and see where NIL and some of these other things land. Let these issues happen on somebody else's watch, and then kind of pick it up. And because the thing is if you go for a super conference, are you really that concerned about how long somebody's got a grant of rights for? You're just going to blow up the system at that point. So I don't know if you necessarily need to look for an off ramp to sit there and say, well, these dates match. So, it's all well and good that you have an ailing Big 12, and then you have rights deals in the Big 10 and the Pac-12 that both seem to be coming up in about, within the same vicinity. But, if you're doing super conference, I mean, could you really put a super conference together just from those three conferences? I think you need to kind of look at the ACC and the SEC at that point to be able to get there. And the SEC isn't selling right now, and the ACC is locked down.
And through all of this, nobody is asking, what's the ACC going to do? They're just asking, what is the Big 10 going to do? And if they're not asking what the ACC is going to do, to me, that tells me that they think the ACC is going to be fine. So where's the concern? Why is there concern for the Big 10? And I guess the concern for the Big 10 is that they need to keep up with the SEC because they need to be 1 and 2, whereas the ACC is okay being third because that's what they've been. So, to me, that's what that is. I think right now the safest, easiest thing would just be some sort of an agreement with the Pac-12, which they've done in the past. The Big Ten has in the past, and it fell through because of scheduling issues. But, that may be a way to give a lifeline to the Pac-12 as well through the TV partnerships, and it's going to give the networks inventory, which they desperately want, and it fits. And then if it fits really well, then maybe you're talking about a super conference of I don't know, say 24 teams, Big Ten and Pac-12, where you've got a pod of 6 out west, a pod of 6 in the mountain to plains area, a pod of 6 in the Midwest, and a pod of 6 in the East. And then they fluctuate on who they play every year, something like that. I think if the Big Ten just stands pat, now you're competing with the ACC, which I think is okay. What you don't want to do, what I don't think they want to do, is go grab schools to grab schools, because that doesn't help you. It takes money away from the current schools, and it's just doing something to do something. And I can't believe I'm saying this. I would rather the Big Ten do nothing than do something. And after watching them last year, that's a tough call to make. Maybe no decision from the Big Ten right now is better than any decision from the Big Ten based on what we've seen,
or at least any announced decision. So we basically have like 4 or 5 different groups in which this seems to be falling in regards to people's speculation. It's Big Ten does nothing. It's Big Ten adds 2 members of the Big 12, which tend to be Kansas and Iowa State, although there's an academic issue with Iowa State, correct? With the AAU?
Offhand, are they not? I mean, I've done this so many times. Have we agreed that they're not part of the AAU?
I'll
have to scramble. Somebody will scramble on that one, because I've been through this so many times too. And then you've got the Big Ten poaching from the Pac-12. USC, UCLA are the most seem to be the most listed candidates. Then you've got this Big Ten Pac-12 merge of sorts. And then you've got this either just Ohio State or Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, or Ohio State, Michigan going to the SEC. Those seems to be the containers of thought generally.
Yeah, and Iowa State is not part of the AAU, so it sounds like they should not even be considered because of how stringent the Big Ten has been in adding those members. So yeah, I don't know what the best answer is, other than I think the best answer is the Pac-12, and whatever way you want to do that. If at first you just want to come to some agreement, and then after that, if you realize, you know what, I'd rather like if the Big Ten is like, if we just add a couple of more, or 2 or 4 teams, although I don't know how you do an 18-team league, if you do pods of 6 or something like that, because once you get so big, you can't just keep it in divisions. You've got to do something about it. If they do 2, that's 16. So yeah, that would be the easy thing. But there are some interesting programs out west. I mean, and programs that would fit, and programs that would make people stand up. Like you add a USC and Oregon and UCLA and a Colorado. Like, sure, those last 2 aren't much, but Colorado has a national title in the last 30 years. UCLA has been around for a long time. And of course, USC and Oregon are major programs. Are they down? USC is, but Oregon is on its way. It's a consistent program. There's plenty of stuff to like there. It's as, I guess, as notable as what the SEC has done. And so I think if that's what you're going for, then you've accomplished that.
Didn't what we experienced during the pandemic and how each conference approached it, didn't that give us a look into the power structure of each conference and what's important? So you had the SEC that was steamrolling straight ahead. We're playing football. Then the ACC tended to just align with the SEC. They seem to be a little brother to the SEC of sorts. Then you had the Big 12. They latched on to that threesome there. And then you go out west, and the Pac-12 seemed to put football in the back burner. You could argue at one point in the pandemic that their situation was more severe. They had some hot spots, but everybody had hot spots at various times. But where there was this just conflict that showed, at least to me, that there's a gap of thought and priorities between academia and the working class, I guess you could say, would be in the Big Ten, where the football is so successful, but there's still a very high standard of academics attached to it. So now you play it into this situation, and it seems like football is always going to rule in the SEC. There could be some type of fight between athletics / football versus academics in the Big Ten.
Well, I think you come down to the philosophical debate of what is expansion? Where does expansion really matter the most? I mean, I think to us on this show, and to definitely all of your viewers, we look at it from an athletic side. We look at it from what the on-field result is, and that isn't even necessarily of what does this mean for field hockey or ice hockey or baseball or anything like that. This is football, football, football. But obviously the Big Ten has shown with its AAU demands that this is, expansion is so much more. And I know that we had our show on Monday, I believe. I don't know. The week is running weirdly for me. On Monday, that we're talking about admission to the BTAA, which is formerly the CIC. The BTAA, I think, is like Big Ten Academic Alliance. The CIC was the Council on Institutional Cooperation. Billions of dollars with a B, billions of dollars are at stake there. When we're talking about needing $70 million, of perceived added value to be break even for a television contract that a team needs to bring in, that's 70 million. We're talking billions. So, I'm sure that the Big Ten certainly has this view of, it wants its teams to fit within certain frameworks, certain parameters in terms of academic accreditations and things along those lines. If we really let the eggheads make this decision, they would just go for Cal and Stanford and call it a day, because that would get them all of their academic jollies at that point. I mean, they certainly, that 9.5 billion that the CIC or the BTAA would certainly swell with those two schools in there. But you talk about leadership of conferences and how things go on. We've already gone through Big Ten Media Days, so it's going to be about a year before they hear me speak again and I could get in trouble. But what kind of leadership does the Big Ten have right now? I'm not really quite sure at this point. I think that the move of putting Barry Alvarez into a football monitoring role is certainly a step in the right direction. Barry Alvarez certainly was an ally of playing football, is an ally of the things that we all hold dear. But where does Barry Alvarez's reach end, and where does the reach of the Dr. Schlissels at Michigan and some of these other presidents, where does that begin? Everybody's concerned about Kevin Warren in the top spot, but it's those damn eggheads that are going to get everybody in trouble, in my opinion.
Let me just correct one thing that I said. Iowa State is part of the AAU, but so what? You can't compete with Oklahoma and Texas with Kansas and Iowa State. It reminds me of the starting shooting guard after Michael Jordan retired the first time for Chicago was Pete Myers. Does anybody remember Pete Myers? Myers is. So do I. He was fun. He was a defensive guy, but the general person isn't going to know who Pete Myers is. Pete Myers is Iowa State and Kansas compared to Michael Jordan of the Oklahoma and Texas, even though Iowa State certainly has their success against those programs.
And the thing before we introduce Steve here, that people get caught in the moment, and Iowa State's hot right now. Matt Campbell can't be, your realignment can't depend on one guy. and it pretty much would depend on one guy, Matt Campbell, coaching at Iowa State forever, because Iowa State is a 3-win football program. And until they prove it otherwise for an extended period of time, plus the money draw on the facilities and everything else, the footprint and the recruiting doesn't come with Iowa State. It would be simply, we got a good football team suddenly, and maybe that gets maintained to some degree. So Iowa State is not the gem that a lot of current football fans think that would be. And one other thing, Steve, before we pitch it to you, is just, again, love to get Steve's thoughts on this as well. It just seems to be, I think the the football heads in the room, as Kevin pointed out, we think that football is the cash cow for everything and supporting everything. And that's not necessarily the case. And in this case, it is a drop in the bucket. Steve Hellwagon Bucknuts, of course, joining us as always. Good to see you, Steve.
Yep. And my other thing was they replaced Phil Jackson with what? Tim Floyd? Is that what the Bulls did?
Of Iowa State.
Is that right? And it's a perfect analogy, Iowa State. So Iowa State is never your answer. I'm just kidding. There'll be a clamor to go to 16 because we've got to have 16. Well, you got to have the right 16. That's the problem. Is if it's not Notre Dame, it could be Notre Dame and anybody just to balance it out, and it's the right 16. So it could be Notre Dame and Iowa State if that's what you want to do. Somebody asked me on Twitter last night, what about Iowa State? And I said, they've already got every home in the state of Iowa tuned into Big Ten Network. This at a premium price. You don't gain any more money by adding Iowa State. I mean, you gain $0 by adding Iowa State. So, I'm of a mind that if it's a non-entity, it's just not worth it. It may seem like 16 is some magical number, but if TV isn't going to pay you more for your rights based on value, and SEC will get more value by having Texas and Oklahoma as part of their conference, and maybe 1/16 of that pie will be worth more than 1/14 of the current pie, which, again, the mathematics have to add up. I guess they say the current CBS value on that contract is completely undervalued. And when they resell that to ESPN or ABC or whoever, that's going to be a huge windfall for the conference alone. So you have to bring value. And, USC, UCLA, I don't know. To me, that seems like a lot of messing around. So and a lot of 10 o'clock games. So I just don't get where that really brings much to the table for Ohio State, Michigan, and Penn State, which I think is also part of this discussion, and maybe Nebraska. I don't know. Wisconsin, maybe. I don't know. It's interesting where this is headed, but there was a lot of talk a few years ago that we would eventually get to these 16-team mega conferences, and SEC has beaten everybody to the punch with what's going to be the absolute best 16-team mega conference. No question about it.
As Cheryl points out here, I think this is a thought process of a lot of people, and I get it, but it's thinking in a silo. So big deal, the SEC. It's already the best conference. They add Texas and Oklahoma. If Texas and Oklahoma play the kind of football they have for the past decade, well, they add one of the top 5 teams in the country, roughly, in Oklahoma, and Texas will continue to underachieve and be the 10th best team in the SEC, I guess, would be the conversion pretty much. Okay, let's say that happens. Big deal. Okay, Ohio State, if you don't care about the entirety of the Big Ten, Ohio State just continues on its merry way, ruling the Big Ten and showing up for the playoff every year against whoever shows up for the SEC, which is probably going to now be 2 teams until we go to 12 teams. And then it's going to be 5 or 6 teams from the SEC, and maybe the Big Ten gets 2 in or whatever. So, but I think that there are just ramifications beyond that in regards to recruiting, number one, where just there's already a thought from, and this is one of the reasons why Texas A&M is caught and passed Texas in recruiting, and certainly on the field, that when you can say we're the SEC to a recruit versus the Big 12, and now the Big 10 may start to take on that kind of perception that this is the league that does nothing. They're not on that upward trajectory. Just the look of it, Oklahoma and Texas joined the SEC, and the SEC was already king. So just your typical 5 stars going to say, okay, well, I go to Ohio State. I'm just going to play a football season to wait for the playoff. I just think it's going to be difficult to overcome the negative recruiting that Ryan Day and his staff's going to face.
I don't know. I don't know if it hurts Ohio State as much as it helps or hurts the rest of the conference. I think Ohio State's still going to go out and get its kids from within the footprint. And with that footprint, I really mean just the state of Texas. Ohio State does recruit Oklahoma a little bit. Josh Proctor's from there. They're recruiting Chris McClellan from the same high school, Owasso. But I think it hurts other schools because other schools may not be able to show the record of success, the record of production, of development. So maybe your Penn State, your Nebraska, whoever, and I'm not trying to put Penn State, Nebraska necessarily on the same level. I'd probably every Penn State person I know would freak out and yell at me if they heard me say that. But I don't know if they're going to be able to go down there and recruit as well, because suddenly Auburn, suddenly even Missouri or somebody can look a little bit more attractive by saying, hey, you know, we're SEC. You're going to be, you know, you're going to play a couple of games at home, or you're going to in your home state when we go and we play either A&M or we play Texas or whatnot. So there certainly is an issue there in terms of where it hurts in recruiting. And I do want to correct you somewhere. The Big Ten does do something. It cancels football. That's what the Big Ten does. And then it doesn't revisit it. And then it revisits it. So they don't, there's not inaction. It's just incorrect action.